Way. So welcome everyone to this fourth webinar in Solver's Soil Health webinar series. And today we're going to talk about contaminated sites and its relation to soil health, and also its relation to the new soil health monitoring law as well. And I am my name is Yvonne Olsson. I'm a member of the Solver network, and I will tell you just a little bit about the Solver network. So Ingrid, if you would please have the next slide. Yes, so what is Solver? We are a self-financed platform, and we're quite a small platform, but we do a lot actually. And you can see the members and countries and organizations represented by the logotypes in here. And we work towards knowledge development and knowledge exchange on soil and land management. And our motivation and mission is that we see an added value to join forces of issues of common interest of our Solver members to take a step further on these topics. And what we have in common is soil in general. And we also have different ways of facilitating collaboration between experts and policymakers and other stakeholders in order to improve methodologies and tools and try to provide guidance for better management of soil. You can actually see both a little bit more about Solver at our web page and at our website, solver.eu, and you can follow us on LinkedIn as well. Next slide. Let's see. Yes, I told you that this webinar is a part of our Soil Health webinar series and the fourth one. So we have had previous webinars about soil management and land planning, and also recycling brownfields. And the last one was on the concept of technosols. And if you did not join the previous meetings, you can see them because we record them. And on our website, you can see them under Solver meetings if you would like to look at them. We have had quite a lot of interest for our webinars. And I'm quite happy to say that to today's meeting, we have actually 30 countries represented in the by those that have signed up, and let's see how many will join finally. But we have more than 130 people that have signed up for this meeting, so that is really nice to see this interest. Yes, and the next slide, please. Yes, we have some house rules for today's meeting to make it move smoothly. And we would like you to stay muted. Of course, when you speak, you can unmute, and that you turn off your video unless speaking. And if you have questions, you can raise your hand when we have time for the questions. And you can also write in the chat. And if you write something in the chat, we would appreciate if you add the speaker's name. So if we save the questions for later, if we don't have time, we can see which speaker you addressed. And if you think that someone has put a very interesting question, you could add a thumbs up to that question so that we see if several people have an interest in the same questions if we haven't had time to post them. And we also have a Miro board. You will see a link in the chat as well, where you could also add ideas or remarks or suggestions. So we can have a look at it later and maybe get ideas for webinars or other things later on. And as I said, we will record this meeting and publish it on our website later. Next slide, please. Yes, we have a very interesting, as I see it, program today with a mix of presentations, but also a panel discussion. And we have a lot of competent people here today. So I myself, and I hope that you look forward to an interesting day. And I will not say much more about this, but I would be happy to leave the word to today's moderator, Linda Maring from Deltares, who will introduce the speakers and also moderate the panel discussion today. So welcome everyone, and have a nice meeting.
Thank you very much, Yvonne. I do have a small question already to you. In the Miro board, there are 4 places, I think, where we can leave our comments. Do you have a specific place where we have to go in the Miro?
Then I would like to ask Ingrid to help me out, who is running the Miro board.
There are 4 webinars, and you can go to the designed part for this webinar, so for healthy soils.
Okay, thank you very much. So look up the right place, and then you can add all your comments and ideas and what you would like to have for next webinars. My name is Linda Maring, indeed. I work for Deltares, which is a research organization in the Netherlands. And I'm really enthusiastic about this webinar, and that I was asked to moderate this one because I'm really full of healthy soils. I'm also involved in several mission soil projects. And I think we should start now soon with the first presentation in this webinar, and that is Bavo Peters. Bavo works in the soil team in DG Environment already since 2017. And his team is responsible for the implementation of the soil strategy and also the soil monitoring law. And Bavo is going to elaborate on that in this first presentation. Bavo, go ahead.
Hi, good morning, everybody. Thank you, Linda, for the kind introduction. I will present you today the new soil monitoring law, which entered into force last year. It's quite a complete legislation, which does not only deal with soil contamination or contaminated sites, it's much broader. But today, for you and due to the time limitation, I will mostly zoom in on the contamination part. So for those not very familiar, it is a directive adopted at the EU level, which means that the provisions of this legislation should be translated by all member states of the EU into national legislation, and for that the member states have 3 years to do that. Next slide, please. So first, a slide with the overall objectives of the new soil monitoring law. As the name already explains it a bit, the idea is to set up in the EU a solid and coherent soil monitoring framework. This directive covers all aspects of soil degradation, so not only soil contamination, but also degradation processes like erosion, loss of soil organic matter, loss of soil biodiversity, sealing, salinization, etc. So it's very complete. The legislation itself should help the EU to achieve its aspirational objective to get soils healthy by 2050. And this was an objective that the Commission put forward in its soil strategy of 21. The underlying idea is that healthy soils provide a lot of ecosystem services, and that we really need those services not only for the health of our environment, but also for our society and for our economy. And we also need those services as part of a solution for a couple of societal challenges that we're confronted with. Next slide, please. In the directive, there is a dedicated chapter to contaminated sites management. And the concept of a contaminated site is defined explicitly in the legislation, and it's considered as point source anthropogenic contamination. and this as opposed to diffuse contamination. Diffuse, which is everything which is not a contaminated site, is called diffuse contamination. The directive puts a couple of obligations on member states. So member states should identify within 10 years the potentially contaminated sites on their territory. Once these are identified, the site should also be investigated. If contamination on these sites would be found, then a site-specific risk assessment needs to be implemented. And in case of unacceptable risks, member states need to ensure that the necessary risk reduction measures are taken on these sites. In the legislation, there is an indicative annex which lists a couple of options for remediation and also for other risk reduction measures. But this annex is not binding. Member states also have an obligation to establish a public register within 4 years, and this register should be made public online, and the register should present at site level all the data that member states collect and have available on the presence of potentially contaminated sites and contaminated sites on their territory. And lastly, since transparency is an important principle of the directive, member states should also ensure that there's sufficient public involvement. So the public concerned should have the opportunity to provide comments on the overall risk-based and stepwise approach. They should also be allowed to provide additional information or to correct information on certain sites when they think that information is incorrect. Next slide, please. The member states also have a lot of flexibility, but also a couple of legal tasks they have to do. They have to implement, first of all, the risk-based and stepwise approach. So this means that they need to transpose the whole set of rules and implement that into national law. Member states should also define a hierarchy of responsibility. So determining who will be responsible to do the soil investigations, who will do the risk assessment, who needs to do or implement the risk reduction measures, and more importantly, who will pay for all of this. Member states also need to define a list of potentially contaminating activities that will be used for the identification of the potentially contaminated sites. And this list will, of course, define the ambition because the more activities, the more potentially contaminated sites will have to be identified. Member states will also need to define a list of events that might trigger a soil investigation. A couple of options here are, for example, the request for an environmental or building permit, excavation works that take place, land transactions, sales of real estate, etc. Member states also need to establish the rules on how exactly to do a soil investigation. So what should be the procedures, the timing, and the priorities for such an investigation. They will also need to establish a methodology for site-specific risk assessment. And for that, they need to look into an annex of the directive, which lists a couple of overall broad general principles. And lastly, they also need to define what they consider as unacceptable risks for human health and environment. And this definition will then trigger the need for risk reduction measures. Next slide, please. So in this slide, we go from the contaminated sites to diffuse soil contamination, which is only one of the many soil descriptors in the directive. Here, member states should identify diffuse soil contamination through stratified random sampling. So it's a random method or monitoring method. And they would have to monitor contaminants on all sampling points of their monitoring framework. And the directive lists a couple of heavy metals, but they also need to select certain organic contaminants. And for this first category, so the heavy metals and the selected organic contaminants, member states will have to define so-called sustainable target and trigger values. And these values, the trigger values at least, will trigger support from member states to soil managers to find solutions for these problems. There's also a second category, which lists the PFAS family. So member states will have to select certain PFAS substances from the family. Also, they will have to set pesticides. And of course, they can go further and also select other chemicals. And those three bullets, they will have to monitor on a subset of their monitoring framework. This is left to them, what the subset would be. And no criteria have to be defined for the second category. Now, because the member states have a lot of flexibility here, the Commission will provide support by providing an indicative list of soil contaminants, which member states then can use to select or set certain categories. Next slide, please. Then I added 2 more slides on the timeline for implementation. Apologies, because it might be quite small, I realized, to read. But here you see the implementation timeline, and we already we're working already quite hard and started with the implementation. The Commission will have to provide a lot of support documents to member states to facilitate the implementation. So this process starts by the end of the year with a guidance on how member states should establish their soil monitoring framework. Next year, by June 27, there are a couple of guidances with regards to soil contamination. So by then, the Commission should come forward with this indicative list of soil contaminants. We should also provide guidance on how to set the sustainable target and trigger values, which is relevant, as I showed you, also for the descriptor on diffuse soil contamination. Also by June, the Commission should present guidance for member states on how to define the methodology for site-specific risk assessment. And there are a lot more actions that will be coming soon in the coming months and years. Next slide, please. The next slide continues. So I guess you will receive the slides and you can look a bit deeper into the details of this later. Thank you, and happy to try to answer your questions.
You, Bafo, very well in the time set. Are there questions from the audience to Bafo? You can raise your hand. I see a lot of applause in the screen. You can unmute and ask your question or put it in the chat. If not, then I can ask a question to you. Oh, Horst has a question. You go ahead, Horst.
Hi. Horst Herzog from InfraServe in Frankfurt. Thanks, Barbara, for the nice and very informative presentation. Regarding this public registers and this database, or however we would want to call it, do you know if there's some discussion with member states on implementing or using already existing systems? Because in Germany, for example, I would say that almost every federal state of our 16 ones has such an existing system, and sometimes I have the impression that we are trying to gather all this information, which are, for example, very important for local people in, I don't know, Bavaria or Baden-Württemberg or wherever, and to gather all this information in Brussels. And sometimes I'm not sure why. Why is it important to do so? Why is it important to build up an additional information system on that?
Okay, thank you for your question. I think I should make clear it's not the intention to create a European system. I mean, if member states already have systems that operate, and indeed in Germany, I think these are mostly operating currently at Länder level, so the more regional level. These can be kept. There's no problem. However, the directive specifies in Annex 6, I think, the conditions of what data these registers should present. So present at site level, and also at spatial level, so on the map actually.
Okay.
So of course, the existing registers need to meet those conditions. So if they currently do not meet these conditions, the existing registers will need to be adapted. However,
okay.
There is no obligation for member states to report these data at site level at the European level. So the different registers should be put and made available online, but there is no reporting obligation, or hence the data from the different member states will not be collected at EU level to build, for example, a European register. So that's not the intention.
Thanks for clarifying. Then I got it wrong. Thanks a lot.
There was also a question in the chat from a person named S. So thanks for the presentation. And Bavo, how do you see citizens specifically involved in this reporting? Do you see them involved?
So it's not fully clear what we mean with reporting. So there is an article in the directive which deals with reporting, but reporting is typically a process between member states and the Commission and or the EEA. So member states, they need to collect soil monitoring data, they need to do assessments, and those data will need to be reported at the European level. However, as I also already explained a bit, there are opportunities for citizens or the public concerned to be involved in the implementation of the rules. So they can provide information that they have, or if they see in the register that their property is mentioned in the register, but the information is incorrect, they should have the possibility to rectify this, and they should also be able to provide additional information. For example, if they have information about a suspected soil contamination, they should be able to provide that information to the authorities.
Yeah, thank you very much. I hope that answers the question. I see several other hands raised, but we are on a very tight schedule, so I'm really sorry. But the people who have questions to Bafo, can you please add it in the chat, and then we can give Bafo the opportunity to answer it as well in the chat if he can stay a bit longer in this webinar. But I would like to go to the next speaker who also had her hand raised for a question. Sorry, Virginie. The next speaker is Virginie de Rijke. She is a researcher in contaminated land management at the French Geological Survey, BRGM. Virginie's work involves supporting the French Ministry of the Environment and leading research project focused on integrating biodiversity and soil health into contaminated land management. And she does this through the development of tailored data-driven decision-making processes. Also, Paul Drenning will be presenting in the next presentation. And Paul is a postdoc at Chalmers University of Technology in Gothenburg in Sweden. Paul works in the Islander project together with Virginie, and he focuses on integrated nature-based solution and soil health considerations into contaminated land management. Paul also looks at economic valuation and analysis to develop business cases for brownfield redevelopment projects. Virginie and Paul, go ahead.
Okay. Thank you, Linda. So hi, everyone. The work we're going to show you today with Paul is a part of the Icelander project funded by Europe. And it's about how we make soil matters in contaminated land management. It was supported with other partners from the consortium from Nova, Nazare and Vanessa, and Christina from GTK. We can go for the next slide. And maybe can you show the slide in its entireness. So the point that the approach we took was to, of course, see soil health as a critical factor in achieving sustainable land management, and how to do that apart from the science that has been developed in both soil health expertise field and contaminated land management. We took a look at how we could do that so that stakeholders would easily apply it. And when I say stakeholders, I'm not thinking about site manager. I'm not thinking about researchers, but the experts that actually do the remediation on sites. And from the contaminated land management perspective, their need is that, okay, I'm used to deal with contamination and remediate it in a certain way. So please add soil health so that I can still work and still remediate the source, still manage the risks correctly. So in a very practical approach, that is the need from this perspective. And now we had to look at the soil health perspective, which was, okay, you have a way to look at soil, which is kind of only risk orientated, and I can bring you some other perspective on soil. So this was like building a compromise, and this compromise was built on kind of navigating between those two expertise. And to make it work, we suggested a kind of a two-scale approach, which is we need something that is consistent at a broad scale perspective. We need to make this compromise that at the end, the risk is managed, and as well as the soil health itself. So what we did, the methodology was to have a fine analysis of the contaminated land management process to kind of make the smallest adjustments. So really dig in the way contaminated land management is set, and highlighting the consistency in the approach. And what was developed also was fine scale tool for precision. So at each step, to adapt the tool that help to assess soil health to each of the answers that need to, and the decision that need to be taken at each step of the contaminated land management process. So we can go for next slide, please. Thank you. And the graph here is showing you the remediation you can choose. And remediation on the risk reduction, it is something that is not new, that is already done in contaminated land management. And what is added is the level of soil health that you need to obtain. So you kind of fine-tune the remediation strategy. Again, land use. Usually in contaminated land management, you will only look at the land use and risk. Do I have schools here, or do I have industry? And now we kind of put into that feed the level of soil functionality, soil health that is needed in that. So it's kind of matching land use with risk and soil health expectation. So we can go for the next. And we had still going on this two level of soil health level, risk level, was to pinpoint the context that will, well, when the compromise needs to be built, but because when you have a compromise, you need extra energy. So where you have high unacceptable risk on the top, this is the usual contaminated land management. You don't have to be careful to have to be detrimental to soil health level. But if you have a high soil health level, like the context 3, you need in your remediation to be more careful, either to protect or to restore. So this is context would help, we think, contaminated land management to see if they need to be careful of any soil health level or even biodiversity level that they need to compromise with soil health. And I took the liberty to put like the chapter of the soil monitoring law in which you have the main emphasis, and it's to show the drivers of when you manage soil in this context. In this context, it refers more to chapter 4 or chapter 3, because chapter 3 is resilience of soil, but the risk is acceptable. And in the end, well, we want to see healthy soil with acceptable risk and acceptable soil level. So this is really an overview. And now Paul is going to present you the what we called input points. Sorry, Paul. Next slide, please. So this was a really broad, and I think, yeah, the thing is, how do you integrate as an overall, and also as we work at a finer scale, which is how to go into the indicators and which indicators do we need at each point of the reflection and the question we have. So you can have different questions related to soil health. You can see soil health as a receptor if you have a high level and you need to protect it, and then you've got the ecological risk assessment. And if you're in a remediation position, you're going to have to choose your technique, and then you've got to use indicators to help you match this to the future land use. So I hope, Paul, I haven't
That's okay. I can take over from here. Yeah, thank you.
I haven't spoken.
No, it's fine. I mean, yeah. So I mean, I'll try to talk a bit more about how we've been thinking about concrete ways of integrating soil health into contaminant land management. And I mean, as Virginie was talking about, I mean, today we're very focused on risks for human health and the environment. And primarily using that to define, say, fitness for use for future land use, and remediation is often taken when it's legally mandated. And what's important to note is, while contaminated soils are maybe not considered healthy, they can still perform important soil functions, deliver ecosystem services. And we're trying to really integrate that whole perspective in ways of thinking about fitness for use. And also important to note that remediation itself and specific techniques can have considerable negative impacts on soil functionality, which is something we looked at in more detail in this project. But just thinking about specifically integration, we think about kind of there being two contexts for thinking about soil health and contaminated land management remediation. And as Virginie was talking about, thinking about soil health itself as a receptor and considering the risk to soil health from the contamination and from the remediation itself. And then also thinking about the impacts of the remediation process. So you go to the next slide, please. So we've tried to contextualize this a bit more by thinking about entry points for integrating soil health into the general contaminated land management process, which is shown in the figure on the right. And so we've identified roughly 10 of these and divided them according to sort of a project phase, which corresponds to the Islander roadmap developed in this project. So you can see from the top, there's the very early stage identification phase, and then the more envisioning or initiative phase, defining project goals and land uses, design, etc. Then you get to more concrete planning phase, and then the actual realization or implementation, and then finally sort of the monitoring and maintenance. So I'll try to zoom in and talk about each of these stages in a bit more detail. So next slide, please. So looking at the first part, the identification, and this really just has to do with what data we're using in a nutshell. So the background soil data, and there's a lot of really great projects nowadays compiling and just coming up with new soil data that we can really integrate and use in the contaminated land management decision-making process as well for contamination, but also just other threats and degradation for soil and just overall underlying soil quality as well when there's our natural soils. And we can use these to establish, say, thresholds for when a soil is considered poor quality, medium quality or good quality, which is always a challenge, and sort of reference values or background values for establishing references. And we can use this data to sort of prioritize which sites we want to take action, which types of actions we want to take as well, and kind of align these with some of these other broader environmental objectives, because there's, of course, all kinds of things we want to do with soil and land, from agriculture to carbon farming, climate sequestration, managing water, etc. So if we have a better idea about what we're working with, we can align these objectives with, say, remediation redevelopment. So next slide, please. And then we're still working in the early phase here in the vision or initiative. And here we want to emphasize that we should really consider soil health early in the process, because once we do that, then there's a lot of other options that become available. And we can connect that to the future land use. And we can also connect that to, as shown in that sort of purple box, how we formulate our remediation redevelopment goals, and also integrating soil health considerations into these early preliminary investigations and risk assessments, such as the conceptual site model. Thinking about how we can consider that in our site investigation. And then also, as I mentioned before, just thinking about broadly the fitness for use could include both risks and the required soil functionality, because this varies considerably depending on our future land use and what kind of functions are required. Next slide, please. Then we move on to the planning phase, which has a lot of different boxes here, so I can't really go into too much detail, but as Virginie also mentioned, we should really be thinking about which indicators we want to use in our site investigation and try to align these with our intended future land use and the desired soil functions, and these can vary considerably considering depending on the land use and the functions. And then we should also try to broadly consider the risk to soil health as part of the risk assessment, both from contamination and residual contaminants, ecological, ecotoxicity, etc., and think about this. And we should also broadly try to think about expanding our option appraisal to include things like nature-based solutions or other low-impact techniques as part of the risk management, but also a way of sort of restoring soil functions when relevant. And also, as part of this option appraisal, consider the impacts of the different techniques on soil functions. And as I mentioned, that's something we looked at in more detail in the Islander project, which will be coming out in due time. And then the next stage, when you're evaluating your different site management strategies, we should try to take into account potential externalities, both positive and negative, wider costs and benefits, that are associated with the project, which can be linked to the land use as well as the remediation technique that we're using. And soil health improvements is a significant positive externality that can be resulting from a project that can actually be a major factor motivating or justifying a site management strategy to begin with. And then the last step there, oh God, my computer might restart in 5 minutes, so I gotta be quick, is linking our remediation objectives to these more quantifiable soil quality indicators. And here's a need, of course, to develop thresholds, which is where this background data could come in handy. Next slide, please. And then the realization implementation. And I think we've had some really great presentations in previous webinars where you use the soil quality data to establish sort of different zones of functionality for a site, and then try to adapt and modify and tailor your design and your remediation strategy according to the soil functionality. And then also establishing protections for these sites that have good soil functions or good quality. And then, of course, trying to minimize disturbances. If you're driving heavy machinery over a site over good quality soil, it's like you kind of killed it. So kind of maybe try to establish some sort of protections, which is probably easier said than done. And then what we want to emphasize as well is this plan for the refunctionalization of the soil and rehabilitate the soil by, as part of the remediation process, minimizing the impacts, and then thinking about how you can restore it. Integrating nature-based solutions or soil amendments as part of a treatment chain or an automatic part of the process, not just as an afterthought, which I think is very important. And then next slide, as the final part of this step. Monitoring and maintenance, as sort of an adaptive monitoring and maintenance, so like iteratively improving and changing our monitoring strategy and our site management strategy according to whether or not we're meeting our outcomes. And we verify outcomes, ideally quantitatively, both for regulatory compliance for risks, but as well as integrating sort of soil quality indicators to determine whether or not we had positive or negative impacts on soil functions. And some of these can take a very long time to show any sort of improvements, so that's something we should consider as well. Yes, and so next slide, please, just to wrap up. So some of our take-home messages is we think integrating soil health and contaminant management is really essential for better decision-making if we care about soil health, which we should. And as I mentioned, fitness for use could cover both risks and soil functionalities. And what we've been doing in Islander is, as it showed, considering different soil health entry points. As Virginie showed, the different possible soil health trajectories and scenarios that you could consider for a site, fine-tuning indicators, matching those to functionality and land use, and then trying to tie all this together in something called the Islander Roadmap. And all this that we presented here will be part of a couple two deliverables coming out, but they're in the revision stage, not quite done yet. But so keep an eye out for that, and feel free to visit the website, sign up for the newsletter if you want some of this information. Yeah, so that's it for us. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much, Virginie and Paul. I think it was a very nice presentation with a lot of practical aspects presented in your 10 points. You have talked a bit into the questions time, but we can have one short question if somebody has a short question. I do not see any hands, I think. I was wondering, how do you consider time as part of the equation in the choices you need to make? And did you consider that as well, Paul or Virginie? Short answer.
Yeah. Maybe I can, and then you can complete if you want to. I say time is already something that is considered when you choose a remediation technique. I've got some colleagues, experts in remediation. They would say, okay, the time I have to remediate, there's the cost I have to remediate. And so there is already something that I guess is not something to change, but what is going to change when you choose a remediation technique is that you put more information to the site owner that will help him choose maybe a longer or older strategies to choose this remediation technique, because I know low input remediation technique will maybe put have more time. But if you support this remediation technique with more information, this is why you need to have more time to remediate. It might support those. I don't know if Paul, you want to add something, maybe?
Yeah, I agree. Just a short additional point is I think that's why considering soil health very early in the process and say as part of the planning process really opens up a lot of opportunities that we wouldn't have otherwise, because some of these project timeframes can be very short, where you want the remediation done, say tomorrow, but then your options are very limited. But if you think about things early and consider what kind of land uses we want 5, 10, 15 years, all of a sudden we have a host of different options that we wouldn't have had otherwise. So I think that's very important.
Yeah, I agree with that, because if you
sorry, I have to interrupt
Oh
because
no, sorry.
otherwise
Talk too much. Talk too much.
Thank you. No, thank you very much, both of you, for this wonderful presentation. And now we go to the Nicole network. Nicole, most of you will know it, I think, but it's a leading forum on industrial coordinated sustainable land management, European network. And it promotes cooperation between industry, academia, and service providers on the development and application of sustainable technologies. And we have two speakers again. We have Dennis Lemke. Dennis is geoscientist by training, and he works for the specialty chemicals company Evonik, where he leads soil and groundwater remediation projects. Dennis also chairs two national industry working groups on soil protection, and for about a year now, he also is serving as the chair of Nicole. We also have Horst Herzog. Horst is a geologist and has been working for 25 years for Infraserv Host in Frankfurt am Main in Germany. He has over 30 years of experience in contaminated land management, dealing with site investigation, risk assessment, site remediation for different types of contamination, and industrial site development. And Horst is the chairman of the Nicole Industry Group. Horst and Dennis, please go ahead.
Yeah, hi. Thanks a lot, Linda. I will start, and I'll pass over to Dennis. And Dennis, for if I'm missing something, if you're missing something on one of my slides, please intervene. Hello, everybody. Thanks a lot for having the opportunity to give this presentation together with Dennis. As Linda said, we are both working in the industry at Evonik and at Infraserv. Today we are presenting as members of the Nicole network, and we'll take a look at a soil monitoring law from different perspectives. First, looking a little bit back. A little bit means 100 to 150 years, just because I think, or we think, it's important to have the scene set for what we want to bring over today. Then a glance on the environmental perspective for industry regarding soil monitoring law, the economical perspective, which is an important one, soil health. Some may ask themselves, why should industry care? And last but not least, the role of relevant networks like Nicole. And wrapping up with a summary. Next, please. Just a very short introduction of Nicole. Many of you maybe know Nicole. It's a European network, an industry-led network. As some of you know, or many of you maybe know, there are different pure industrial networks for, like CEFIC for a chemical industry, for, I don't know, airport operators and so on. But within Nicole, we tried to put together a more broad perspective, not focusing, first of all, not focusing on one industry, and second, not focusing only on industry. We have around about 150 members, normally company members, industrial ones, academics, and service providers. And we're working, we have we're working in our own groups, industry groups, academics groups, and service provider groups, but we are also interacting in a very strong and positive way, trying to get a quite holistic position on different environmental topics. And the most important message this year, we're celebrating our 30th anniversary, which will be on our workshop in Naples. So if somebody, thanks Linda, if somebody would like to join this workshop, please feel free. Next slide. So brief history of industry in Europe. Next slide, please. Where do we, like Bavo said, or mentioned in his presentation, we of course have diffuse pollutions, and we have point pollutions. We have certain sites, industrially used sites, and as you know, these sites could be given up industrially and switched into other land uses, which is one aspect to be thought of. But the focus, or Dennis and my focus today, is on the on contaminated land, but which is still used industrially. Beginning with the 1860s, 1870s, there, especially in Germany and England, in France, there started lots of industrial developments. People were normally poor. There was a strong need for rising living standards among lots of population, and there was a strong, we called it pioneering spirit in developing products and processes. Just to give one example, the production of dyes, which was till the 1860s, done in small pharmacies. They got their raw product over the Silk Road, for example, or over a quite dangerous and very long sea road by ships. And I don't know, but probably at the end of the day, only 20-30% of the input material came to Germany, probably, or in this area. 1816, it was in Germany. And people started to think about how to produce these dyes industrially, and they got the first solutions in 1963, 1864, and between the starting point and, let's say, the 1970s, there was a quite low level or lack of environmental legacy cost, or of environmental legacy. We had at that times normally something like a police law, so you had to do everything you do without harming your neighbor or another person, but soil or groundwater contamination or water contamination, all the emissions we're knowing today weren't in focus. Often the soil filling was done with production residues. Why? Because of course we didn't have the landfills we have today. We didn't either have this view on this importance of a good landfill, and on the other hand, rising production numbers meant immediately a linear development of waste. So people had to do something with this waste. And for example, on our site here in Frankfurt Höchst, we have got 40 million tons, which is a quite high number, of man-made filling material, which we're working on. So quite contaminated site. Another example are, for example, the wastewater treatment plants, which were which really industrial wastewater treatment plants started in the 1960s. cleaning one exposure pathway from production water into the river, for example, in a mine or Rhine or whatever. But the first possibility to incinerate, for example, this quite contaminated sewage sludge was in the 1990s. Oh, sorry, there's missing a 9. It's not the 1900s, it should be the 1990s. So 30 years in which one emission pathway was stopped into the river, into the rivers, and another pathway was opened till the technique was so far to make possible this incineration. So in this era, lots of soil and groundwater contamination occurred. Next one, please. So from an environmental perspective, for us, for the industry in Euro, the soil monitoring law. Next one, please. Today, things like this shouldn't happen, and they normally don't happen. Why? Because the soil pollution pathways are very strictly handled in the industry. First of all, we have national emission legacies and European ones, like the Industrial Emission Directive, which you probably all know, which keeps an eye on minimizing or making sure that there are no emissions, not minimizing them. New emissions are not to be expected because we have our baseline reports today, additionally to all the soil monitoring we already had before 2014 when the Industrial Emission Directive got into force. Restoration and then the restoration and remediation of soil and groundwater contaminated affected sites, which is not new, but very welcomed attempt. And we normally have a risk-based and sustainable management approach for the remediation of these old contaminations. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. Next one is the economical perspective we would like to look at. So one question is, of course, how much will it cost? A fear that today's in the industry is a quite high economical burden for the member states, which is expected, which of course the member states would pass over to possibly to industries. And that's why the economical burden for the industry for us at the moment is quite uncertain. And it's really highly dependent on the actual implementation in the member states. We just brought in 2 examples. First, the general handling of potential contaminated sites. So will there be an additional effort to an already existing very high standard in many member states, for example, like in Germany or Netherlands or Belgium? And will there be what's with trigger events? For example, what shouldn't happen, that we get away from this risk-based attempt and just get figures, trigger figures. So together with this public acknowledgement and then just publishing publishing everything about contaminated sites shouldn't mean that meeting certain values immediately should mean also an action which has to be taken. Next slide, please. Dennis?
Thank you, Horst. So now we get back to the actual topic of the presentation. So why should industry actually care? There are a number of good reasons why industry should care about soil health actually. So one thing is that we kind of learned the hard way that the prevention of contamination is much better than the remediation. in terms of costs, in terms of effort, in terms of almost everything. So it's really in our own interest to not create any new contamination of soil that triggers any kind of remediation projects. That then it really is. And another point is that there's kind of a change in in the attitude, let's say, about also the stakeholders of the companies. So actually, they really do care about soil health. So a company, especially the big ones, they of course have shareholders and so on. And you can be sure that we are regularly asked about these kind of aspects, especially also about biodiversity. And if we all remember, the soil strategy comes from the biodiversity corner, right? So people do actually care. And at one point, surprising maybe, but also industry, it's people, right? It's people, they spend the whole day in a factory, in a site or something. And those people, of course, they appreciate green spaces much more than sealed surfaces. And well, sealed surfaces do not really stand for soil or healthy soil, right? Green spaces do. So that's why there's also another point why we should and why we do care. And then there's one thing, you're all aware of it, of course, also the supply chains. So our, let's say, something that's really important for us to operate. They also rely on ecosystem services. So and that's why industry really needs healthy soils. There are numbers for that. It's well proven and it's also well understood by industry. Next slide, please. I'll keep this short. Yes, thank you very much. So the Nicole Network, well, there was the introduction already. We also reached out to Barbara before. Of course, we're ready and also happy to help if there's anything we can do to contribute to implement the soil monitoring law. We're more than happy to do so. We have a lot of experts and groups from all kinds of regions, let's say. So if there's anything we can do, we're happy to help. Next one, please. Good summary. So healthy soils, they can strengthen ecosystem and supply chains. This is, I think, well understood and is also not new. So that's why we really appreciate and we care about soil health. The soil monitoring law at first, so after having, I don't know, water and air emissions and so on, everything has been regulated on an EU level, now also soil. So it's the first time and a good chance to regulate this aspect of protection. And of course, as Horst already mentioned, there's some things that we're a bit concerned about that we probably also haven't fully understood yet about the definitions of this in the soil monitoring law and some mechanisms like this trigger. Honestly, this is something we are really a bit careful about, let's say. And then, of course, in the last sentence here, you see all the buzzwords here. It's a proportionate, practical, risk-based implementation of the soil monitoring law essential to avoid unnecessary burdens while achieving environmental goals. So, yeah, also not new to say, but this summarizes pretty much the industry's view from the on this soil monitoring law. And that was our last slide. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Horst and Dennis, for this presentation. And I'm really happy to see that the industry is so proactive and also pro-soil health. And I was also very relieved to hear that actual people work in industry and not aliens or something. There is time for a very short question to Dennis and Horst from the Nicole Network. So you can raise your hands and unmute. And if there's no question, I was wondering how is Nicole currently being involved in the implementation of the soil monitoring law? It's just started, but how do you see that? I cannot
so for
hear
now, we participate. Oh, you cannot hear me? Is not better?
Yeah, now I can, yes.
Okay. So for now, perfect. So what we've done so far is, I mean, we have one representative in this soil expert group. Yeah. So and we give our input if there's any drafts of guidance documents. But of course, we also, if there's anything to be developed later on, we can also well gather our experts and also create, let's say, ideas or text boxes or whatever. We're not quite sure yet how this will in practice work, but we are pretty much open to anything that can help here. And we are in a dialogue with Bavo and the Commission already on that. And yeah, we are happy for looking forward to the collaboration.
That sounds very good. I also wanted to invite Dennis from the industry perspective and Bavo from the policy perspective, together with Nazaré Couteau, who I will introduce from the science perspective into a short panel. We have eaten up a bit of the panel time, but I think it would be very interesting to join these science, industry, and policy perspectives now. I start with Nazaré. Nazaré Couteau is an associate professor at Nova University in Lisbon in Portugal. She works on soil management and remediation technologies, and she focuses on soil contamination, sustainable land management, and how remediation strategies can support soil functionality and ecosystem services. And she was also contributing to the presentation earlier from Virginie and Paul in the Island project. So we will talk in this panel a bit about new concepts that are needed or may be needed for contaminated site management that also is involving soil health. And I was wondering if you can reflect a bit on how we can integrate soil health and what do we actually need to do that in contaminated site management. What are the most important changes from your view? Dennis, can I start with you?
Sure. Well, there are several aspects actually, but if I could just wish for just one, I would probably pick moving a bit away from this linear approach of contaminated sites, or dealing with contaminated sites, which is normally for decades already. It's just assessing, and then you remediate if you need it, and then you monitor and see if there's any risk left. So what I've seen in many cases already is that you do not see the whole picture here. You have to integrate everything else that's around it. So all the stakeholders like neighbors and also see what kind of effects does the remediation have on the soil, but also on other stakeholders. So I know we all know this word sustainable, and we've heard it so many times, but in this case, it really helps us in a way. So I personally have seen many remediation projects where once you've broadened your view and you checked out what's the electricity consumption, what is the noise emission, and what is the disturbance of the soil itself, and so on. If you have a look at all that, and also the future land use and so on. So it's quite a lot of work in the beginning, but then you end up sometimes with very surprising results. And I've seen it before. I think, I don't know, it was said by Virginie, I think so. Remediation itself sometimes has a negative effect on soil health, actually. And I sometimes find this is not clear to everyone. So what I would like to see more appreciated, and also people being more open about sustainable land management and also land stewardship. And I was very happy to see, Bavo, that also in the soil monitoring law, when you see at those risk reduction measures, I think it's, I don't know, in one of the annexes 4, I believe, this is already in there. So you have these biological methods in there and so on, and also the monitor natural attenuation and so on. At least where I work, this is just starting to be recognized and appreciated also by the authorities. So in short, please check the whole sustainability world when you do this assessment and dealing with contaminated sites.
Okay, so more integrated approaches. I think this also asks for trust and collaboration and courage between the different actors. Nazaré, can you also reflect what do we need to incorporate soil health and contaminated site management?
Thank you so much, and good morning, everybody. It's a pleasure to be here, and thanks for having the possibility to participate. Well, to start this discussion and to start the conversation, I would say that it's how we conceptualize soil when we think about contaminated land management. Normally and traditionally, we were for a chemical-centered approach. We would think about chemical contamination concentration, the threshold values, And in fact, we were treating soil in a sense as a passive medium. So we were ignoring the system. And it was discussed today, this integration on the part of soil functions and the part of ecosystem services. So basically, with this new paradigm shift and with this new approach, the soil would be understood as a living system that, of course, we know it is, but we would connect with these functions, biomass production, water regulation, nutrients, carbon storage. So basically, one of the reflections is that maybe we can change between this contamination above a threshold value and try to have an action on it. But going to the concept of soil functionality and if we can restore the soil. In fact, this integrates with this idea of soil indicators that also includes contamination itself, of course, but it would link with risk assessments and ecosystem services. So basically, the key takeaway from this side would be try to restore soil functions and not only to reduce contamination concentrations.
Do you think we know already enough to do this?
I think it's a long process, but we are committed. I hope that we.
Okay, thank you. Bafo, what do you think is needed?
Yeah, I think I agree with the previous interventions that we should not only look at the chemical quality of the soil, but also not forget the biological and the physical quality. And I think we do that in the new soil monitoring law because it explicitly also requires or states that soil remediation should be sustainable. So it's not only about even the environment, but also about the society and the economy. And the law also says that we should not forget what Danny said, that soil remediation in itself might also have an impact on soil health. And then the example that is maybe exemplary is the heat treatment of the soil, where you heat soil to volatilize the soil contaminants, but you end up with a completely dead soil. So the question is then, is that desirable? Because we need to look at soil health also, because a healthy soil in itself is more resilient, and it's more resilient also to deal with contaminant loads. So I certainly agree what has been said by the previous speakers.
Okay, thank you very much. And also, when looking at soil health integration, do we also need different approaches? For example, when we look at diffuse contamination or at contaminants of emerging concern, Bafo, can you elaborate a bit on that as well?
Yes, I think so, because in general, diffuse contamination occurs usually at a wider scale and at lower concentrations than point source contamination or contaminated sites. So that makes remediation of diffuse contamination also more difficult. The contamination is usually also more mixed, so it's not fully clear who caused the diffuse pollution and who is the polluter. So hence it's more difficult or impossible to apply the polluter pays principles. So at the EU level, in other legislation, we have also experimented with new schemes. For example, in the Urban Wastewater Treatment Directive, there is now an extended producer responsibility scheme. So that could be an idea. And I think for diffuse contamination, it's clear that prevention is even more is the key principle, because once the contaminants end up in the environment, it's very difficult to find an appropriate solution. So we should prevent as much as possible that there are releases to the environment.
For contaminants of emerging concern, we have now PFAS and pesticides discussions. What do you think is needed there?
So there, I think, and it has been mentioned already a bit, also by Dennis, I think, we see that the linear approach is difficult to continue, or does not necessarily provide the right solution to the problems of emerging contaminants, because we see that there still is a uncertainty about the risks in some cases, or that science is still in progress or evolving. So the linear approach of you investigate the site, you assess the risk, and then you remediate, and it's done, not necessarily works anymore, because at some point you need to reopen certain cases which we thought of they were closed, because there's new knowledge or new insights in the risks of emerging contaminants. I think the circular aspect certainly also applies to how we deal with excavated soils, that we should avoid as much as possible that we dig and dump the excavated soils on a landfill, but as much as possible treat them and bring them back into use.
Just wants to react, I can see. Go ahead.
My turn?
Yes.
Oh,
yeah,
okay, great.
your hand is up, so
Well,
I thought you have a very burning...
Thanks so much. Yeah. It's a very short reaction, Barbara, what you said about the diffuse pollution. I think this is something that's really, really challenging because of a number of reasons. So on one side, the analytics, they get much better. So now we discover diffuse pollution much better. And then I think we have the challenge, of course, I have to come up with PFAS now. So we all know there are large areas contaminated with PFAS. And then you approach them with the traditional derivation of threshold values. And then you end up that you might have exceedances over a huge area. So the question is, so when you have you have a defined site, then you know what to do. It's easy. You can dig it down, or you can find solutions, but you cannot do this when you have a couple of square kilometers that are affected. And also when you use the derivation methods for threshold values that may be 20, 30 years old, then you end up that you have a problem everywhere. And I feel like I'm not sure if we have a solution to that yet. For PFAS, I know there's a lot of discussions all around Europe, but I'm quite afraid it won't be the last substance or group of substance where we discuss this. There will be others. So I don't have a solution, it's just a comment, and I'm really curious how we will handle this.
And Nazaré is producing solutions, I hope, from science side. Bafo already mentioned that science is in progress. What is your opinion, Nazaré?
Yeah, thank you. Of course, I totally agree. I would just add that it was mentioned a part of the polluter pays principle, so it's difficult to find something specific when we think about diffuse contamination, but also the challenges, as was also mentioned by Dennis, is related with the large scale, the low concentrations that sometimes we have, although we have residual values that may be much more toxic than the original compound. But maybe from the contaminated land management perspective, when we in point source pollution, we think on a site-based approach. At this point, maybe it's a system approach, a landscape thinking, of course, connecting with the preventive approaches and try to understand how it may work. In terms of the contaminants of emerging concern that were also mentioned, I believe this adaptive framework, it's important in the sense that we used to have fixed values. I'm not saying that, of course, we don't have to have threshold values, but we used to have fixed threshold values, known substances. And as time passes by, we understand that we all need a more flexible approach to deal with this uncertainty and the part of these mixtures that will start to appear. And in the case of soil, they start to be permanent in the environment. If we think about the pesticides, of course, in our European soils, we still have pesticides that now are banned, but they are a legacy that we have to deal with, but also the pesticides that are legal. So basically, it's not only a problem about the market, but it's also a problem related with the accumulation in soil and how the science and knowledge progress. So basically, in my opinion, it's to have this flexible and adaptive approach to actualize on a constant basis this approach of the type of contaminants, the values, and so on.
Okay, an adaptive approach. When we were discussing this panel, you also mentioned that including soil health will reduce long-term remediation costs, and at this point, it can also you could also argue that it will be more expensive with all the integrated approaches and more collaboration needed, more science needed. Why do you think so, that the long-term remediation cost will be lower in the end?
Yeah, I think it's a bit tricky at the beginning, but if we think about long term, maybe we have the arguments to start changing our thinking and our mind. As mentioned, remediation is mainly focused on contamination level. So basically, we can solve the contamination today. And I mean today in weeks or months or years, it depends, of course, but we create long-term liabilities. And that is one of the main problems, I would say. So basically, if we think that we may shift from contamination to soil functions, and we put this into perspective, we know that soil health will reduce costs. For example, if the natural processes are working, you can expect that your soil will degrade some contaminants, will stabilize other contaminants, or will have the buffer capacity to deal with the changes. On the same note, we may try to address the root causes and not the symptoms. So basically, the soil will be a system to control risks at a certain extent, of course, and at a certain extent as well will promote stable long-term conditions. This will increase resilience, and we will have other benefits like a soil that is flexible and able to help us deal with floods, droughts, erosion. So basically, we are also tackling other soil degradation factors. And if we think about the soil health indicators, in the sense that we are approaching soil health and not only the contamination part, we are also improving decision-making because we are avoiding unnecessary remediation. And we know that healthy soils are less vulnerable. So basically, and going to the part of the economical perspective, traditionally we focus more on these lower short-term costs, and in long term we will have a higher cost. But with the soil health approach, we may have a slightly higher upfront investment, but we will have lower costs over decades. So basically, I would say that the key takeaway is that if we restore the ecosystem once, and once it's in comas because we cannot do it today, we will avoid managing the problem forever.
I think that is also quite in line with what was thought behind the soil monitoring law. I see a lot of hearts also popping up. Dennis, do you also agree, or are you a bit afraid for the costs from the industry perspective?
Happy that I can react to that. I can agree to what you said. I mean, of course, the long-term costs, this is something that really hurts. And I think we can all agree that it's much easier to prevent remediation than to remediate it. So once it's in the soil, it goes to groundwater, flows away, gets diluted, and so on. It's a nightmare. And for the costs, I mean, there's one mechanism that also hurts industry is we have to build reserves. So once we have a remediation, we cannot just look at the short-term costs. We have to look at the cost 20, 30 years from now. So this is something that is really also that matters in the company's books. You know, that's the case. And and for the soil health, yes, I totally agree. So if there's soil is healthy, then we should keep it healthy. That's right. But from the beginning, when I heard this term soil health or soil health, this term, well, sometimes I was wondering how to do this when you have a very old industrial installation. Yeah. So you have a plant, it's still producing, it has been producing for decades. The soil beneath it is most likely not healthy. And I honestly have no idea how to make it healthy without, I don't know, moving the plant or something. So we should keep in mind that sometimes it will not work to make soil healthy. But then again, it's about getting the picture, the whole picture, what is reasonable to do and what can be done and what actually has a meaningful impact. But of course, I totally agree. If something that is healthy, please keep it healthy. That's in the interest of everyone.
Bavo, can you react on that? All soils healthy in 2050 will probably not be possible to reach that. How do you look to that as being from the soil team from the European Commission behind the soil monitoring law, setting that ambition?
Yeah, I think you should see it indeed, as you say, as an ambition. So in the law, it's clarified that, you know, it's an aspirational target. So it does not bind the member states legally. If in 2050 we go back to them and certain soils are not healthy at that moment, there is no consequence for them. But it's an ambition, and I think, yeah, it's something to work towards, something we can use also in our daily work. It's an important policy goal or target. But I indeed would not exclude that in 2050 there are no unhealthy soils anymore. So I think we should also be a bit realistic in that sense.
I think it is at least very positive and hopeful that both science, policy, and industry are all pro soil health. We are all wishing to go to soil health. From this discussion, I heard a few really nice concepts or ideas. We have to work more to integrated approaches instead of the linear approaches. We can look more to landscapes instead of sites to really understand how the ecosystem works and how we can also make use of the soil function and the ecosystem services. This asks for collaborations, of course. I think we should hold on to this point of good collaboration to really integrate soil health. And also these long-term benefits, to keep that also in mind as an incentive to keep on working on soil health integrated in contaminated site management. I'm really sorry that I have to end this panel now. I really want to thank Dennis, Nazaré, and Bavo for joining this panel discussion, which is from Cécile Leguerne. Her name is wrong on the screen, but her name is Cécile, and she's also from the French BRCM. Cécile is specialized in urban geosciences, and she ambitioned to contribute to a sustainable management of soil and subsurface. In this frame, Cécile develops at various scales data, methods, tools to help decision making. Cécile focuses, for instance, on soil health, looking at their multifunctionality, indicators, spatial approaches, and at their degradation. Think about contaminants and artificialization. And she does this in the perspective of objectives as the no net land take target and the neutral land degradation and climate change objectives. Cécile, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Linda. So I'm going to talk about the memory of soil, knowing that pollution is a component of soil health, and with some aspects of mapping the soil pollution hazard for spatial planning and moving towards indicators linked to contamination to integrate this in the soil health assessment. Oh, I don't have the, yeah. Next slide, please. So as you know, soil is a resource, a common good even, but it's threatened. Actually, more than 60% of the soils are degraded across Europe, and local and diffuse pollutions are factors of soil health degradation. But actually we have a partial knowledge of it, and the question is how to better anticipate this. So next slide, please. So how about soil contaminants? So if I focus on urban areas, many contaminants are linked to human activities, like industrial ones, but not only those. But they may also be linked to some anthropogenic deposits. And in this frame, there are various issues linked to this soil contamination. Of course, sanitary issues, but also environmental, economic, and legal. And actually, these issues are valid at various scales, from site to territory, through catchment or district. And so if we look at the planning scale, for instance, at territorial scale, so we need to know more about soil contamination, for instance, for deseeding strategies or renaturing strategies. So next slide, please. And in cities, how can we do if we have no geochemical data? The hypothesis I propose is that soil has a memory, and actually soil accumulates all the current and historical contamination pressures. And in this frame, so the idea is to develop the pressure of soil contamination, to map this pressure, and to provide to the territory managers GIS layers as alert to alert them on soil contamination pressure. And for this, we use a historical land use analysis. So the methodology that was developed within two French projects, the Décivil project, which is linked to deseeding strategies, and Kazazan project, which is linked more to the no-net land take and land degradation neutrality objectives together. So the maps that I'm going to present were developed within this project, and the methodology adopted was first an approach by origin of contaminants, first considering industrial and service activities, also agriculture, domestic activities, transport, but also anthropogenic deposits as sources of contaminants, so diffuse and point source contaminants. So we produced then thematic GIS layers and combine these layers into one index with a level of soil contaminant pressure from none, a priori none, to high level of pressure. So next slide, please. So here is the example of the map, soil pollution hazard, soil pollution pressure map obtained at the scale of Nantes metropolis in the western part of France. We considered the following hierarchy of contamination sources. First, residual industrial contamination, followed by industrial contamination management in progress, and then also considered former industrial service and activities, as well as agricultural pollution pressures and the question of anthropogenic deposits. So in the map, the red parts have a higher pressure than the yellow one and the blue ones. And for instance, in some places you have the pressure is linked only to industrial or mostly to industrial activities. In some other places, it's linked mainly to agriculture, to the right. And in some places, you have a superposition or combination of various pressure, like here in the center of Nantes, you have both the anthropogenic deposits that were mapped in some, modeled in some places of the city, with development of an intrinsic pollution, a typology of anthropogenic deposits according to their intrinsic pollution potential. And here we have in this area also a more detailed knowledge of industrial pressure with urban historic inventories with very precise location of the former industrial sites. Next slide, please. Another example is the one carried out or developed for Rennes Metropole, another large city in the western part of France. And in this map shown to the right, so it's about the same, but with some adaptation. So we still consider residual industrial contamination as a top information. Considering also industrial contamination management in progress, and again, former industrial and service activities, just that we differentiate the color with deeper colors for current known contamination and lighter colors for potential contamination. So as for agricultural, so we also take them into account, but anthropogenic deposits, we have no real knowledge of anthropogenic deposits, so that we couldn't consider them really. And so we have, so in the city center above, mostly contamination linked to industrial activities, and in the rural area, more pressure hazard, contamination hazard linked to agricultural activities. So next slide, please. So in this, one of the gaps that we have to build these pollution pressure maps is the lack of knowledge on anthropogenic deposits. They are actually poorly mapped, but real potential source of pollution. And in this frame, in situ observations and borehole descriptions are very important. So the presence of artifacts, so human-made materials, in terms of nature and abundance, is important to assess the pollution, intrinsic pollution potential of these anthropogenic deposits. So here are some vocabulary proposed in a paper in 2018 to assess this intrinsic pollution potential of anthropogenic deposits. And also color and odor are also important. So next slide, please. And so, so to build, considering the pollution pressure, is important to anticipate pollution hazard in urban planning. So we need a global knowledge. In some cases, it may be a challenging task. And considering the memory of soil is a good way to increase the knowledge. And in this frame, better knowledge of historical land use is crucial. So there are still various lacks and difficulties, like the lack of knowledge on anthropogenic deposits and their footprint. And of course, with this pollution hazard map is not enough, but it's it guides, it's an alert layer, as I was saying, and there is a need to check the real contamination and assess the pollution risks through soil diagnosis. And so this leads us to the next slide about the indicators of soil pollution. So that should be considered in soil health assessment. And so we of course have the trace elements and heavy metals, and with this that we see that more or less that can be different from one perspective or another. Here I just quickly compared what we did within the Supra project, where we worked on soil health indicators, another French approach of Indicasol, and the soil monitoring law, so trying to assess what's in it. So we have as organic mainly pesticides and metabolites, PFAS more or less, and other emerging contaminants, and of course other classical contaminants, with some which are persistent, like PAH or PCBs, or dioxins and furans, and others that are less persistent. Anyhow, in urban areas, we need to take into account the specificities of urban soils. In this frame, in situ observations are really important as indicators, like artifacts, color, odor. We need also to take into account the heterogeneity of urban soils and be very careful about the representativity of the soil samples that we use. And of course, the indicators need to be adapted according to the pollution pressures, but also to the local context. And next, I think that's it. So thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Cécile. Is there a question for Cécile? A lot of applause. That's very positive. I do not see hands up yet. Or I see a hand up from Horst. Go ahead.
Thanks a lot, Cécile. Very interesting, your attempt. Do you have a stepwise monitor, or are you thinking on a stepwise monitoring? I'm just thinking if we take a look at this big cities like Rennes, Nantes, or Frankfurt, whatever. It's quite a lot of work to take statistically representative amount of samples, of soil samples, and not only in 2D, but also in 3D. And it maybe could be an attempt to, first of all, to look in the groundwater, and only if we find something in certain areas in the groundwater, then maybe in combination with historical land use, maybe then take the next step into the soil monitoring. Or do you immediately start with soil samples all
Actually,
over?
we are in parallel gathering existing data about soil and subsurface, so both descriptive but also chemical analysis, and we already have quite some information, and we are building a collaborative working group at the metropolitan scale, at least in Nantes, to try to share all the existing data and to integrate them in the local and national databases. So we have in France a database called BDSolU, which aims at gathering the data on urban soils, and especially the geochemical data. And so we are we already have in the capacity of doing some statistical treatment of the geochemical results, or the concentrations of pollutants, or not all, but all those were analyzed. And for instance, in Nantes, we assessed that we have a geochemical background. So to work on the geochemical background, we have a geochemical background in the whole territory of about 90 milligrams per kilograms of arsenic, which is very high compared to other places where it's more than 7 or 8 or below 25 milligrams per kilograms for whole France, for instance. So that's try to gather data. And in Rennes Metropolis, we just finished large sampling campaign where we analyzed both indicators of soil health and towards risk contamination to compare with our predictions.
Thank you.
Thank you, Cecile. And there is also a question from Clara in the chat, but you can answer that in the chat. So thanks for your presentation. And we continue with the presentation of Claire Bottini, and she is a soil ecotoxologist, and she works at INRI, the French National Institute of Industrial Environment and Risks. She is part of a team working on the impacts of chemical pressures on aquatic and terrestrial ecosystems. It's called ECAT. Before this, she did her PhD in Canada on the effect of methyl mercury in bird physiology. And she also did 2 postdocs in Canada and France on the effect of different neurotoxic contaminants on wildlife. And she will talk about the EDAFOS project. Claire, please go ahead.
Yes, thank you very much for offering me the possibility to present in this webinar. So hello everyone, can you hear me well? Awesome.
Yes, we can.
So yeah, I wanted to present some results we have. It's a team effort, so I will talk a lot of with a lot of we. It's not a I project. So it's about integrating multiple line of evidence into soil pollution and environmental risk assessment, and the result I will present today are from the EDAFOS project. Next slide, please. So for this project, we use what we call the triad approach, which is basically an integration of different line of evidence. And we use this approach because usually using a simple soil benchmark value are not sufficient to capture the risk posed by multiple contaminants into a mixture. So I think you can show a whole slide, that would be maybe easier. So yeah, to go further and go to progress on this issue, just a slide before of animation prior that. Thank you. So yes, we use this triad approach because it has a multiple integration of information. So for this triad, it's for 3 lines of evidence coming from the chemical, ecotoxicological, and ecological point of view. So in each of those line of evidence, we have multiple measures that we can input in each of them, and then all of those 3 lines of evidence we are brought together into a value of 0 and 1, which is the next animation that will give a different weight of evidence to give this integrated risk assessment. Can we go to the next slide, please? So that's what I was talking about. So we have those 3 lines of evidence and this 0 to 1 value as an integrated risk assessment, where 1 is equivalent to an issue being present and an ecological or a toxicological risk posed by those contamination. While just with the next animation, a value of 0.5 is usually considered as acceptable, 0.5 or below, of course. It was proposed as a threshold value by the author of this triad approach, so Jensen and Messman from the RIVM. Can we go to the next slide, please? So this, yeah, you can probably show it, the full slide. So this EDAFOS project is a consortium from 6 European countries. So we had 12 partners. It's a European-funded project by the Horizon Call. And the aim of this project was to accelerate the land's rehabilitation and ecological restoration of contaminated soil through innovative based solution. So the result I will present today are more like a baseline of before those implementation of nature-based solution. But the project is still ongoing, so hopefully I will have the before-after result at another point. Can we go to the next slide? So this slide is just a quick presentation of 5 sites we sampled and where we tested this triad approach. It's basically those 5 sites are all across Europe. They are usually associated with a mining area or agricultural and wasteland contamination. This symbol on the right, you represent the contamination of different metal concentration. Because we focus for this approach specifically on methyl. Of course, there are other contaminants on some of the sites. But basically, more spike there is on the symbol, more higher is the concentration of a specific metal. And so you can see that 3 sites, for example, the Greece, the French 2, and the Spain site are more heavily contaminated in some substance or some metal than other sites. Can we go to the next slide, please? Okay, and once again, you can show it fully. So this slide is just a quick picture photo of our sampling, soil sampling protocol. So we use this Lucas sampling procedure, where for each site we collected soil at several areas and combined them into soil composites. So we collected the soil, 5M, and then collected it, and then this soil collection was done just prior or just after the implementation of nature-based solution, which is the last picture at the bottom of this slide, where specifically in there they put some trees in the ground to see what may happen after that. Can we go to the next slide, please? So yeah, for each line of evidence, so we have a chemical, ecotoxicological, and ecological line of evidence. We, as mentioned, we collected several measurements, several types of data. So for example, for the chemical line of evidence, we had total soil concentration, bioaccumulation in vertebrates, while for the ecotoxicological line of evidence, we have both measure of soil toxicity, but also we did some ELUA to some fixation to measure the effect of toxicity of leachates on Daphnia and microalgae, for example. And for the ecological line of evidence, we had measurements indicative for soil biodiversity, so with a nematode diversity or microbial diversity, but also we quantified several enzyme and organic matter decomposition to have a measurement of soil functioning. And all of those results at some point will need to put it in regards to the structure of the soil of a agro-pedochemical data like pH, water holding capacity, organic matter content, so that we better understand why, what's going on and where the toxicity come from. I won't dig into those results for this presentation, but I'm happy to take questions on that. Can we go to the next slide, please? So this first result is the first color come from the toxic pressure from the total soil concentration. So basically, closer, once again, closer you are to 1, more risk there is that this concentration in the site will affect a large number of species, regardless of the kind of effect. And the second measure is the snail bioaccumulation, which was the snail were exposed to the soil collected, and after a certain time the concentration within the snail was measured, and we compared those concentration to a concentration that are known to produce reproductive delay in those same species. So once again, closer you are to 1, this risk is much more present. Can we go to this? Oh, yeah, sorry, just very quickly. So this figure show you that for some sites, most of the sites are raising an alert as a concentration for total soil concentration. But when we look at the snail, we see some sites that are that do not bioaccumulate as much as others. So that was an interesting result. Can we go to the next slide, please? So those figures are for the ecotoxicity data. Thank you. So once again, we have the sites that are responding differently to those different concentrations. The Spain site, for example, in red, they show alerts signal for every measurement we had. So once again, we had measurement for terrestrial species, which are in brown, and aquatic species in blue. And terrestrial species, there is bacteria activity, nematode growth, invertebrate reproduction, plants growth and germination. So yes, the site in Spain raised alert for all of them, while some other sites, like the French one in blue and the Poland site in gray, do not raise this alert. It's more like everything is, let's say, acceptable. But other sites like the French 2 and the Greece in green raise alert for only some of those measurements, especially some invertebrate reproduction for Greece or aquatic species for the French 2 sites. So that was really interesting to understand better why some sites raise alert on specific results and not others. Can we go to the next slide, please? This is for the ecological measurements. So where we have soil functioning with enzyme activities in the yellow and soil biodiversity measurement with microbial biodiversity and nematode index in green. And we have very similar results where the Spain sites in red here raise alert with most measurements, while other sites like the French 2, it's acceptable, let's say, for most measurements, while the other site is like different degrees of alert raising, getting close to this 1 value for those sites. So once again, very different reaction from site to site. Can we go to the next slide, please? And this last result slide are for the integration of results. So once we combine the chemical, ecological, and ecotoxicological line of evidence into this integrated 0 to 1 value, this is the kind of result we have, where once again the same result being that different sites will react and give different results. So of interest will be that the Poland site, for example, in green, if you look at the standard deviation value in purple below, which is 0.41, it's over the threshold proposed by Jensen Messman, where we consider that the uncertainty around those results are too high to be for us to be certain that our assessment was pertinent or was accurate. So probably for some of those ecotoxicological results or ecological results, we missed some part of the toxicity that was raised with a chemical line of evidence. So yeah, we should dig more onto this site, for example. Another point of interest was for the French 2 sites, where specifically for a very ecotoxicological line of evidence, it's the second most toxic site after the Spain one, while the other, the overall, it's not the most toxic, but from the ecotoxicological line of evidence, it raised maybe not an issue, but different alert signal. So once again, maybe more information will be interesting to know about that and to put in value in regards to the pedoagronomical results of the soil. Can we go to the next slide, please? And so this is still a work in progress, of course. So we still have to learn and to develop and refine those multiple assessments. I will go very quickly on this slide because I'm running out of time. But so that's different proposition of things we can improve on. So on each line of evidence, but also in refining the tool that we put within this those line of evidence. Meaning that right now we did what we like a very integrated multiple measure for this triad approach. But at some point, we will need to identify what indicator really perform well and which one we want to use when we want to save time or save money. So to reduce this number of indicators, but having still the same performance of this approach. Can we go to the next slide, please? And yeah, that was it for me. I will be happy to ask questions, and if we don't have time, here by email address and my coworker email address, so you can send us an email, and they was overlinked in the previous Solver meeting as well online, so you can check those presentation as well if you're curious about the project. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Claire, for this presentation. Are there questions for Claire for the ADAFOS project? I do have a question. One of the sites you use different sites, and the Spanish site looked quite severe in terms of contamination and risks, etc. But if you compare it, for example, to the French one, also very severe, but the snail bioaccumulation looked a bit low there. So does it work, your method? Why was that?
Yeah, that's a very good question. In this snail methods, it does has weakness, which is the behavior of a snail. So we quantify the bioaccumulation of the snail, but basically the methods, you put the snail in a box, so it can go on the ground, but it can also go outside or on the wall of a box. So if a snail choose to avoid this soil, which we think it's what happened, because the pH of this soil is very low, it's around pH of 4. So we thought that the snail choose to avoid the soil and stay outside on the wall of those box in dormants. So, and just wait there up to the time of the end up of the experiment. So they didn't we thought that it's more like a behavioral avoidance that reduce this bioaccumulation within those individuals. Does that make sense?
Behavior is also an aspect then.
Yeah.
So thank you. And there is also a question in the chat from Brieux. Thank you for this great talk. Is the triad method or approach often used in practice for polluted land management?
It is a decision, a tool that will help decide, yes, what do you want to do with this land? If it's too dangerous, at some point, yeah, action needs to be taken. But if you below this like threshold or closer to 1 or below to this threshold of 0.25, overaction can be taken. In Jensen Messman, for example, they recommended different land use according to the results of this triad approach, saying that if you want to have a natural landscape, you need to be close to this threshold, but then you go to, if I remember well, more industrial and more urbanized type of land use if you have a higher value of this integrated risk. So you can take that into account into the decision for sure, but there's still this uncertainty around your value that you need to integrate as well. And if you have too much uncertainty, you probably need more study before taking any decision. Does that help on the
I
answer?
hope so. Otherwise, you can both elaborate in the chat further, because thank you very much, Claire, for your presentation. And we have to go to the next one, the Aragorn project in this case. And we have two presenters here. We have Hans-Peter Arp, and Hans-Peter is an expert from NGI, that's the Norwegian Geotechnical Institute. Hans-Peter is a professor in environmental chemistry at NTNU Trondheim and also management board member of the European Chemicals Agency representing the European Parliament. He is the Science and Impact Manager of the Horizon Project Aragorn that will be presented, and he is also coordinator of the Zero PM project, and that stands for Zero Pollution of Persistent and Mobile Substances. His co-presenter is Ali Kanso. Ali has a PhD in soil science and is R&D director at Microhumus, specialized in pedological engineering and ecosystem restoration. And Ali is one of the task leaders in the Aragorn project, and he also coordinates international projects across Europe and also in the Middle East. And hereby I would like to ask Hans-Peter and Ali to present. Go ahead.
Great. Thank you very much for that very nice introduction, Linda. And yeah, so for this presentation, we divided in two. I'm just going to give like a helicopter overview of the Aragorn project and our, say, holistic and tiered approach. And then Ali will take it further with showing a case study for soil health indicators. So next slide, please. So just to introduce the Aragorn project, we are a sister project of IDAFOS, which just presented in Icelander. We're funded under the same call. We are 18 partners from 12 countries, and we're focusing on hotspot pollution, particularly those contaminated with PFAS, organochlorine or bromine, like such as pesticides, petroleum and coal compounds, and metals. Next slide, I think, or this is an animation, might be. Yes. Yeah, and we're doing, yeah, well, let's go here. Yes. And so I'm just going to present some slides that are just showing you the overall Aragorn approach. And the first thing to think about is that we have three interlinked frameworks that we work with when we approach remediation. The first is risk assessments, and here it's particularly on chemical risk assessments. And we also work hand in hand with socioeconomic assessment about how to approach contaminated sites and resilience assessment. And within resilience would follow things like erosion or biodiversity, or in this context, soil health. So there is maybe in some cases some overlap between risk assessment and resilience, but here we're really defining risk assessment from the chemical pollution dimension. Next slide. Yes, and by our tiered approach, we see for all three of these three frameworks, there are various levels of complexity we can take, and sometimes with all contaminated sites, it's not necessarily to get to the same level of high quality data. A lot of things can be done at a more of a simpler level, and some things at a more complex level. So we do have these three tiers. The tier one is the qualitative analysis, tier two semi-quantitative, and tier three semi-quantitative. And we take this approach through all our frameworks. For instance, with socioeconomics, it would be we would not have really any parameters quantified in terms of financial terms, but at a tier three, we would have all parameters related to a remediation project defined in monetary terms. And also for resilience and soil health, this will just be the decision of what are the local indicators that we want to follow, or what are important to follow when we're doing a remediation site, and what we should be keeping aware of. And we can get up to tier three with a multi-dimensional modeling on that front. So it's also a prioritization to say what kind of data do we need to prioritize per site, depending on the needs and the goals of the site. And next slide, please. So the question is, how do we get to that level of understanding what indicators we need for the site, or what we're going to prioritize, or what data we're going to focus on? And for that, we have a co-creation approach, which means we really work with, have a framework to how we engage with stakeholders at a given site. And co-creation, this is something that comes from the environmental anthropological literature. And you might know from past experiences that sometimes big remediation projects go bad because the local stakeholders were informed, and there can be protests. And so you really have to kind of map out who are the people involved in each contaminated site. And there's a kind of way you can monitor how much that the stakeholders are contributing to the remediation goal and what type of data they want. And at the very basic level, this is just having a strategy of informing the stakeholders and generating interest in the remediation project. But ideally, you want to involve them in such a level that the stakeholders themselves, and not just the consultants or those presenting the finances, are making all the decisions. You want the stakeholders to feel that they are also decision makers and having some autonomy on the remediation project. So this is a way to track that. Next slide, please. And now I'm just going to give an overview of some of the different details about how we approach our different frameworks, and also as I can mention, depending on the stakeholders, depending on the site, what we're looking at will focus, and how much data and initiative we put on each focus will change. But for chemical risks, we have 3 approaches, and we could use more. We could also adopt other approaches, but these are just the 3 we're working with in the Aragorn project. One is a spreading model that would look at chemical risks to groundwater below the site, or to recipients like nearby lakes or waters, so how the site could affect water resources. The other is the human health risk assessment model, looking at different pathways which the contaminant can contaminate humans on the site through eating plants or exposure to dust or air. And then there's the terrestrial toxicity aspect, how that's affecting the soil terrestrial ecosystem. And there is a relation there with, for sure, soil health. But what we choose for a given site will have different emphasis. Next slide, please. And did we miss one on socioeconomics? Can you go back one? Oh, okay. Okay, a slide seems to be missing. Oh no, it's in the wrong order. You're correct. Okay, resilience is the next slide. Next slide, please. And this is also just showing a general approach. It's not being specific, but I mean, you can have different properties that we are assessing for in resilience. It can be soil health, it can be erosion, and then we have a different step for understanding the factors that are contributing to that system resilience, and then eventually how we're going to do that modeling through a framework. And there's different ways to do it. And it all depends on how we're going to approach that indicator, because what we often find too is when we're modeling something like resilience, we want to ensure that we want to avoid regrettable remediation from this project, or from a land remediation project. So we want to ensure that we can get the data that we need and the sophistication modeling approach that we need to ensure that this happens. Next slide, please. And then there's the socioeconomic assessment, which I will just go over briefly, but there's different approaches you can take, such as a cost efficiency analysis or a cost benefit analysis. But in the different tiers, it's also about, again, through co-creation, working with the stakeholders to decide what are your goals for the site. Is it the chemical risk? Is it the resilience and the resilience indicator like soil health? Or is it also the employment, how much employment we generated from the future use of the site? Is it the housing, if it's for a land development? Is it for infrastructure? Is it for logistics? And then for each of those, we do just have some ways of approaching different levels of resources, depending on how we go through the tiered system and what is prioritized. Next slide, please. So to link that all together, and maybe just click twice, there seems to be an animation in here. There is something how we do. So how do we bring all these things together? Well, our very first steps are very similar to, I think, the approach that was presented by Islander. So you have to do that initial site to see, is the soil in fact contaminated? What is the context of the national regulation process? And then this is when you start also interacting with stakeholders to find the future use of the site, the time frame, the economy, the stakeholder, the level of involvement. And then you have to do this decision of, is the site worth remediating? And then once you make that step, then this is when you really have to go to, say, higher tier levels, because you have to decide on the remediation technologies that are available, and will those remediation technologies get you the goals that you want in terms of risk and resilience? And we put this as an interconnected framework, but we let the ultimate type of decision be done through the socioeconomic analysis as the decision-making approach, because ultimately we want to avoid regrettable remediation. And then following that, once the socioeconomic analysis looks at that, then we will increase the modeling effort to make sure that things are going as planned, and how to monitor the sites, and come up with some ways of following the indicators, and communicating any benefits to the indicators if they're going on track to the stakeholders, or not, to keep them in the project. Next slide. And with that, I'll hand it over to Ali, who will just show an example of how we'll be using the resilience part of this work for the soil health indicators. Ali, take it away.
Thank you, Hans-Peter. So good morning, everyone. So as Hans-Peter mentioned, so here I will present the work ongoing to identify key indicator for site remediation. So we based on two approach. So the first one is tier one approach. So is expert-based approach is a qualitative indicator selection. So in this approach, so we are based mainly on international and European project, ongoing project or achieving project. So like a report published by EEA and some also EU project like Landmark. So in this different projects, so they are a list of metrics, so functional metric to identify the capacity of soil so to sustain ecosystem. So we identify 5 metrics, so nutrient cycling, contaminant reduction, water retention, soil health, and biodiversity index. So in parallel, they are another approach is a data-driven approach. So is tier 2 and 3 is quantitative. So in this approach, so we collect data set, so from different published study and from Aragon project also. And then this data set are harmonized and statistical analysis was conducted. So I will present now the preliminary result. So it's not finalized yet. So next slide, please. So here the objective of data-driven approach so is to identify the impact of soil remediation on soil function over the time. So as I mentioned, so we have 34 data sets. So we have 25 data set from literature review from different kind of contaminant and from different context of contamination and different remediation method. We have also 4 data set from Aragon project. So we have 4 selected site in Aragon project, 1 site contaminated by PFAS at Coser, and 1 site contaminated by PETCO and heavy metal at Homiport in France, and 1 site contaminated with metalloid, so Pezinok in Slovakia, and 1 site contaminated with metal is mining area is Moldova Nova in Romania. So also we have 5 sites was remediated by phytostabilization mainly in France. So in total we have around 350 total sample, so data set. So the main challenge of this data set is the heterogeneity. So we don't have for all the study, all the parameter was conducted before and after remediation. So, and also we have heterogeneity in terms of contaminant. So next slide, please. And to handle this challenge, so we use 4-phase method. So the first one is data harmonization. So we put all the data set together and we identify 18 parameters from which we have almost all the analysis. Then in phase 2, so we conduct statistical analysis, mainly multifactorial analysis to identify the relationship between this parameter, and in phase 3, so is to see the clustering, so which parameter are together in same cluster, and then based on this clustering, so we use modeling in phase 4. So modeling are two way. So we have ordinary list analysis. So is a regression to evaluate so soil remediation, how they evolve over the time. So if it is significantly or not, and if we have difference between treated site and contaminated site. And in the second approach, so is random forest modeling. So to identify the parameter who are involved more in each metric. Next slide, please. So here an example, for example, for so metric of contaminant reduction. So as we can see, the red one so is the contaminated site. So we can see a short increase of contaminant reduction is maybe due to natural attenuation. So over the time, and however, for the blue one, so we can see a strong reduction of contaminant over the time. So it's due to the used so technology for remediation, and both approach are statistically significant. Next slide, please. So and based on random forest, so we can see, for example, we have TPH and we have organic matter and organic carbon have the most predictive on contaminant reduction metric. So we can see the model are very, very significant. So 0.9, and we have a cross validation R square is very good also. So we have a strong model. So for TPH is mainly due to their so decrease of the concentration after remediation, and for organic matter and organic carbon is due to their involving in increasing of microbial activity, so degradation and directly, and also for so pollutant stabilization. Next slide, please. So, and here we have for an example for soil health metric. So we can see also we have a strong model with 0.8 R square. However, the cross validation is not very strong. So we have a fair model in total. So, and we can see, for example, we have electrical conductivity. So the salinity, we have cation exchange capacity. We have, for example, sand. So all these parameters are involved in health, in soil health metric. So however, so to improve the model, so now we use another approach. So now we are creating a 4 data set. So 1 data set for each contaminant, and we are collecting data. And then we will also include the biological aspect, mainly eDNA and microbial biomass analysis and enzymatic activity. And then we will reconduct the work again. So next slide, please. So thank you for your time.
Thank you very much, Hans-Peter and Ali. I think it's very interesting holistic approach. I cannot allow for questions because you were a bit longer presenting than planned. But people, please put your questions to Hans-Peter and Ali and the Aragorn project in the chat, so they can react on you. There is a question for Islander and Aragorn as we speak. So also Paul and Virginie, take a look at that. And then I would like to go to the next presenter, and that is Antonio Obispo. Antonio is an agronomist and an ecotoxologist at INRAE in France, and he is specialized in soil science. Antonio heads the InfoESOL, I think that is French, but research unit in Orléans, and which leads national soil surveys, and he monitoring programs, and he contributes to environmental issues related to soil management and soil health. And Antonio will speak today about the soil monitoring law. Please go ahead, Antonio.
Thank you, Linda. Good morning or good afternoon to all of you. So with my presentation, we will move not from site contamination, but more we will look at diffuse contamination, diffuse pollution, and it will also make the link with the first presentation from Bavo about the soil monitoring law, and so monitoring the soil. So next slide, please. If I may, maybe you can, click all the. Then for this, in fact, for the soil health monitoring, if you look at the soil monitoring law, there are 3 main steps for monitoring soils. The first is to set a monitoring framework, and if possible, the monitoring framework in each country should be based on existing ones. The monitoring framework should be based on this, what is called soil units, that are the crossing of land use and soil types. That's the minimum information needed. And then the report will be made at soil districts that can be administrative boundaries. You can imagine that one district will have several soil units in, and then you will have to report by soil units. And so you will need to sample points in all your soil units. And the number of sampling points will be based on a stratified random sampling, and to reach a maximum error percentage of 5% in each soil unit for the parameters. Then when you define your sampling scheme, then you need to go and sample the sites for true in the field, and then characterize the soils. And concerning contaminants, as it was said by Bavo, you need to look at trace elements, and you have a list of selected soil contaminants to be established by member states. And there are suggestions like pesticides, PFAS, microplastics, then it will be the member states to decide. And of course, when you have your number, you need to assess soil health. So you need national criteria or no criteria. It depends on the contaminants you are looking for. And so that's the process. And so I will come back and see what we already have and what we need for each of those steps. So the next slide, please. If we look at the monitoring framework, in fact, well, I told you we need soil units, we need soil districts, and we need a number of points. We look at that about the existing soil monitoring systems in Europe. It was during the EGP soil program. We looked at existing monitoring networks, and as you can see in that picture, well, a lot of countries already have monitoring networks. Even countries have more than one monitoring network, because they may have a monitoring network for agricultural soils and another one for forest soils. And in other countries, the monitoring networks are divided at are managed at regional scale. So they may have different monitoring networks, like in Italy, for example. So we already have several monitoring networks, but they were designed differently. Some started in the 80s. So they have different sampling strategies. So they will need to adapt. For example, for France, I just took the next slide. I just took the example for France. We already have a monitoring network that it's a grid designed, 16 by 16 kilometers grid. I think we already presented in a Solver meeting previously. And it covers all France, and it was designed at national scale. And now we need to move, trying to combine that network, that existing network of sites, with the Lucas soil network, and also with maybe new sampling sites in soil units that were not covered before. So we are now trying to adapt the existing system to a new one. So that's for the sampling part. For the sampling strategy. Next slide, please. And then when we go and look at the sampling protocols in the countries, you have here, can you click the next? You can see here that we have different ways for sampling in the different countries. So that's the first graph. You can see the dashed red line, it's what is recommended in the soil monitoring law. It's a 0 to 30 centimeters depth. And in fact, you see that some countries already do not sample at between 0 and 30, but 0 to 20. So they will need to adapt. So we have other countries, the majority already sample until 30 centimeters, even deeper. Then if we go to the list of the parameters, I said at the beginning that we need to measure trace elements and also some organic contaminants. And you see that in those monitoring networks, in the ones that are existing in the countries, in the different countries, nearly everyone is measuring organic carbon. But for trace elements, we have less countries measuring trace elements. And even for organic contaminants, it's even less. Only 6 networks are now measuring organic contaminants. And when you look at the organic contaminants, it's more or less, let's say, the old ones, pH, PCBs, for example. and so not the emerging contaminants like PFAS, for example. And another problem is that when you look at the methods for the measurement, you see that the second column of that table, it's the ISO recommended method in the soil monitoring law. And you see that only 3 countries now are using that method, recommended method, meaning that the others are using alternative methods. So if we need to harmonize, yeah, it will be a question to harmonize the results between the countries. Next slide, please. So at a glance, we try to compare in that paper, we try to compare all the different steps, the sampling strategy, plus the parameters monitored, and also the accessibility of the data in that project. And if you are in green, it's that because you comply, you have a full compliance with the soil monitoring law. If you are in red, if you comply to nothing. And you see a lot of red, in fact, in that table, meaning that the columns are the different networks in the countries, the soil monitoring networks in the countries. And the only network that more or less comply with the soil monitoring law is the Lucas Soil Network, because more or less the soil monitoring law was designed based on that on the protocol that were used in the Lucas campaigns. So and even Lucas has some changes to make to comply directly with the soil monitoring law. So and it's even worse for contamination, because you see that for heavy metals and for organic contaminants, yeah, there's a lot of differences. It can be on the sampling depths, but also on the methods for the analytical procedures. So a lot of member states will have to adapt and develop, that's an option, develop transfer functions. So the next slide, it's about the transfer functions. What are the transfer functions? A transfer function, it can be seen as a mathematical rule that allows you to pass from one method to the other one. We started that in EGP soil also. We try to compare different methods and try to derive transfer functions. You see here for pH, if you use calcium chloride or pH in water, you see that there is a difference between the sites, between the measurements, and then you can develop a transfer function between those 2 methods. It's easy for pH. Will it be easy for the trace elements? Not sure. And so there's a EU project that will start in June or July, that is called Soil Harmony, that will develop those transfer functions. And next slide. Yeah, then you need to assess soil health. So you need threshold values. And we did that again in a EGP soil project that was called Siren. We tried to collate and gather existing reference values, threshold values, or target values in different countries. And you see that for trace elements, we have existing threshold values, mainly based on the sewage sludge regulation, and very few threshold values for organic contaminants. So that's something we are missing, threshold values and it was also asked by the soil monitoring law. So to conclude, so the last slide. To conclude, so what we have, in fact, we have monitoring systems in the member states. A lot of member states already have monitoring networks. We have strong skills for sampling soil. A lot of countries develop protocols to sample soils. We have a quite old experience in measuring trace elements, and also maybe old organic contaminants as pH or PCBs, and we have few thresholds values mainly for trace elements. So what we need, we need a lot, in fact. We need first to adapt the existing systems to comply with the soil monitoring law, either by changing the systems, combining the systems, or developing transfer functions. We need to identify new relevant contaminants to be monitored, like microplastics, PFAS, pesticides. So we need to decide country by country, but maybe at European level also, to have a common core of organic contaminants to follow and to monitor. Of course, then we need to develop and standardize the proper protocols for sampling, preparation, and analyze those new contaminants. Are we using the good sampling methods for PFAS or for microplastics, for example? Because we already have sampling methods for soil carbon or for soil pH, for example, but are those methods relevant for new contaminants? We don't know yet. And of course, then we will need to develop those new threshold values, possibly based on common rules. And so now the journey is just beginning. We're just starting the work on that, on all those developments and adaptations. And for sure, we'll need your expertise on contaminated land, because you already work on risk assessment, ecological risk assessment, human risk assessment, and all those thresholds, for example, will need to rely on risks. So yeah, it's important that the two groups need to join to define the contaminants and the thresholds, I think. So thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Antonio, for this comprehensive overview. Are there questions for Antonio? There's also a very lively discussion in the chat, but I did not see yet specific questions for you, Antonio. I do have a question. I think it was very interesting also to see that there is already a lot being monitored in Europe, in the different member states. But what is your opinion? Is it mainly agricultural monitoring networks, or are also the urban, industrial, forestry, and natural soils being monitored?
With ECP Forest, we already have a network for forest sites, so that we have information about forest land and forest soils. A lot of countries already also have agricultural land monitoring, but I don't know. We do not identify urban networks to measure urban soils, so it's maybe something to look at. Maybe there are existing monitoring networks, soil monitoring networks in cities in different countries. We don't know that yet. I don't know. Maybe you know, but we didn't. I'm not sure they are. Because I remember we discussed that in France to try to monitor the urban soils like we are monitoring agricultural land. So for me, a lot of countries focus on nutrients, on carbon. Some develop specific networks just for carbon. Others with the nitrate regulation developed networks for nutrients in soils. So yeah, mainly dedicated to agriculture. Other the networks for forest, but I think we are missing the urban soils quite for sure. We are missing that.
Do people in the audience know about urban soil monitoring networks? Somebody aware of that? I know in the Netherlands occasionally it is being measured now, but it's not yet fully implemented. It's not an official monitoring network. Cecile?
Yeah. So I mentioned the BDSOLU database earlier. So this is for the moment more gathering database, not monitoring database. But it could be helpful to develop a monitoring database. But then we have to work together with the database on agricultural and forest soil at national level to offer a complete system. But actually, for instance, in Nantes, we're really thinking of urban soil observatory
we
in
need
some
to develop
cities at local level.
Yeah, sorry. I think we need to develop it because in the soil monitoring law, urban soils are included in the soils.
Yeah.
So but what is difficult is that if the procedure we are developing to sample, to identify the number of sampling sites, etc., the soil units, we have the information for forest and agricultural land, but we do not have the variation, for example, of parameters in urban soils. We don't know that. We don't have soil maps. just for urban soils, so we cannot cross soil maps with the use. The use will be urban, but we don't have the soil maps to define those units. So is it a garden? Is it a roundabout that we should sample? That's something to discuss. But I think the soil monitoring is calling for that monitoring, for monitoring even urban soils, and it's a good point.
And also the difficulty in urban areas is the change of land use, that it's more frequent than in agricultural.
In the scattered land uses. Yeah, exactly. So that's a very interesting development as well, I think, how to deal with the urban soils. If there are no further questions, I think we have had all the presentations now. I think it was a really interesting set of presentations, so thank you to all the speakers. But there is one more person who will say something today, and that is Margot de Kleen. So Margot, go ahead.
Well, thank you, Linda. And as you said, it was a very interesting morning this morning. And well, thank you also for being such a great moderator this morning and guiding a very interesting panel discussion and presenting all the presenters. But also a big thank you for the audience to join us here this morning. And well, I hope you were really inspired by all the presentations. As you may know, all the presentations will become available on our website. So please look at our website, and if you have ideas, also write them down in the Miro board or in the chat. And well, I'd also like to well, go into a bit more what we learned this morning, because so much passed this morning that you easily forget that, well, I'd like to start with the fact that the soil health concept and the soil monitoring law, as we discussed it this morning, we can also see that it's really embraced by policy and industry together. And I think that's a real good thing, that we can start and look in a new way to, well, our important well, resource, the soil, and that it's of a concern that we try to make it healthy and put all efforts in it. And of course, to make this possible, we also realized this morning that this asks for a transition. Also in the way we look at contaminated soils and how to cope with contaminated soils, but also in a way how soils can contribute to our societal challenges. And that if we look at a holistic way at contaminated land management, we also start to look at how can soils well, add to our societal challenges, and what ecosystem services are still there, even if soil is degraded or is contaminated. And this also put forward that we have to look at soil remediation in another way. And we have pointed it out already that it's sometimes more damaging for soil to remediate it than to slowly let it decompose in a way the contaminants by soft remediation options like nature-based solutions. And sometimes that may not be possible because the soil contamination does that it causes acute risks, but then maybe other measures can be found. What's different actually is the problem of diffuse contamination, because there all the options we worked out for point source contaminations do not already work. Bavo pointed it out really well, that it's a challenge also because it's very widespread. It's on areas and not on spots. It's often in a lower concentration, so we have to find ways. And Nazaré already showed some ways how to cope with that, in the sense of that we should look at the landscape size instead of just for an area, and that we also should take into account that what we do today we don't have to do tomorrow, but sometimes tomorrow can help us to make today a bit easier. So we have to look at different scales and different time scales. What's very nice to know is that we also saw in the presentations that we already have examples of how to integrate soil health into contaminated land management. We showed some promising projects with all kind of perspectives on how we can work together on getting this further on. We have already data. We are, with the soil monitoring law, collecting more data, and that will help us to know and understand the soil ecosystem in certain areas, and will help us to find also management options to cope with those. We get more and more insights also into urban genesis and the layout of the landscape, and how that might help us also in deciding what kind of actions we can take, also for remediation, taking into account how the land was developed in it itself. And then also important that we see that we do not only have to look at technical measures and data, but also in what stakeholders can mean in this all. What are their goals? What are their future uses of land? And what kind of possibilities offers this to find the right way for our remediation? And also in the economic and financing aspects of that. We saw that we have a lot of work to do, also to learn from each other. Antonio also showed that we need to find ways to harmonize the way we collect data, so that we also can compare what works and doesn't work. And for myself, I also asked, what did we miss this morning? And I think we did not miss a lot, because we spoke very broadly on this subject. But I thought maybe we should also think about capacity building, because we are not only working on soil remediation anymore, but we are working on soil remediation in wide landscape with also other people around, and people within your own organization who maybe work on climate adaptation or spatial planning, and they also have to learn and understand why healthy soils are important also for the goals they want to achieve. And this asks maybe also that we give some more attention to soil literacy, and that also is, of course, a part of the goals from the soil monitoring law and the European soil strategy. So we have work to do, but also we see a bright future ahead. So I'm really happy. And of course, this is the end of the first series of soil health the Soil Health Network has provided. We want to invite you now, with all the work for implementing this soils monitoring law, if you have other ideas of themes which you would have discussed by experts in the field within the Soil Health Network, you are invited to write them down in a Miro or in the chat, or just to our network or to me or whatever. But also other subjects on soil and in relation to soil contamination, you are welcome to bring forward, and we might organize a coffee break or whatever. And I think this was my wrap up. I will have to check. Now, I think this is, I hope you enjoy your day and are inspired by what you learned today.
And all in time. Thank you. So I think we end the webinar hereby. I hope you all have a very wonderful day and hope to see a new series of Solver webinars